What's up, guys? So I decided to make this video about the short film I recently shot and just kind of going over the mistakes I made and some of the good decisions I made on the day as a director and a DOP and a sound guy. So I was basically a one-man crew for the day, and I thought it would be interesting for you guys if I broke down what happened on set on the days on location, and maybe this might inspire you to do the same. And maybe you can learn lessons from the mistakes I've made. So if you're a beginner filmmaker, actor, director, editor, or filmmaker in general, I think this video is for you. I think you'll glean a lot of lessons from the on-set stuff, because what I see a lot on YouTube videos is mostly about the technical decisions that were made on set. But this is I'm trying to do everything. The expressive decisions I made and also the technical decisions I made. Cool, so let's get into it. I got the idea from watching an episode of Black Mirror. Crocodile is the episode, where basically these two are drink driving in somewhere in Iceland, I think it is, and they knock over the cyclist and he dies. They decide to hide the body and tell no one that they killed this guy. So I liked that part of the story. That's what inspired me to write this script I wrote with my partner. So I came up with the initial idea, and then we both expanded on this idea. Two people they met on a night out, a guy and a girl, and they were getting on well. Things were heating up essentially. But they've been drinking and taking drugs that night. But they couldn't they couldn't find a taxi to get home, and so she decides that she wants to walk home. But he says, "I'll give you a lift home." She says, "But you've been drinking." But he says, "Oh, it's grand. I've only had a few." So they get in the car anyways, and they're having a bit of crack. And she decides to steal some coke from his pocket and does a line, ODs, and dies pretty much a few moments after that. And so he's left with the decision, what does he do now? And this guy has a good job, has a life, and if he reports the incident, he's going to lose it all. So in a few moments of haste decision making, he decides to go into this girl's purse, look at where she's from, drive her home, and frame it like it was a suicide, like she did it herself in her house, and that he was nowhere to be seen. So he left that night, and 2 years later, very unhappily, he's walking through a park during his lunch break, and he bumps into this, or what he thinks is that girl from that night, but is actually her twin sister. And so this conversation goes down, and she basically takes a picture of him, and we assume that he'll probably be hearing from the authorities. So the shot list, we had something like 60 shots in total over the 3 days we're planning to shoot. Those first 2 days were main shooting days, and then a day of pickups, whatever else we needed. It ended up being 2 shoot days, 1 day of pickup, and then another 2 days of pickups. Stuff we were missing, small stuff, and some added scenes I put in post that I felt the short needed to make the story more impactful. So day one of the shoot went surprisingly well, because I was slightly anxious that this was going to be an entire waste of time. I was a one-man crew. We had a lot to get done on that day. I think it was 3 days we had to get done on that day. And basically I thought we'd probably have sound issues and lighting issues because we were shooting at night. So the first scene was out in the street in Dublin. I went location scouting a few days before now, but this was a different day than when we'd actually come to shoot. So when we'd actually come to shoot, it was a lot busier on that day. So I decided that, for sound issues, it was going to be impossible for us to shoot there. So I decided that I would move the location to another street that I thought would be more quiet. And luckily enough, it was more quiet, even though we did have some problems, like cars were passing by and we had to stop every now and again and move the lights. But it didn't actually take too much. It didn't eat up too much time of the set. But those scenes, that opening scene where they're on the street, it actually went down pretty well. The next scene we were shooting on that day was in the car, and we were driving. So I was quite concerned about this for a number of reasons, because the sound being a big one, because I'd done some tests myself in the car with lavalier mics and a rifle mic. So I had the rifle mic and the lavalier mics, obviously. From that day, I was surprised how good the sound was, and there was no major issues. But I wish the actors brought the volume up a little bit more, so I wouldn't have to turn up the mics on the Zoom recorder, which I was using for my male actor, and I was using the wireless lav system, Rode lav system, plugged into the GH5. The noise floor on the lav system mic on the female talent was a lot higher than on my partner's and the actor's lav mic, because he was a lot louder, and actually the zoom is just generally a lot louder than the lav system. So matching that in post was a bit of a problem. We did a shit ton of takes. Basically, I move on once I get it, and I don't really do any extras because we were so rushed for time. But looking in the edit and realizing that I got all the things that I wanted to get, I was pretty happy with the overall shooting, and my intuition on, yeah, we got it. And those parts I went, we got it, are generally the parts I used in the short. So one of the big errors especially in this car scene. Now, I had a DSLR mount for the bonnet, so the camera's actually sitting on the bonnet and shooting the talent in a 2-shot from the front. So that meant I was in the back of the car and it was not, lying on the floor in the back seat, hidden from view, so, which meant, and I was actually booming the actors. I actually couldn't see the monitor, so I had to set my exposure before we went, and I couldn't change it. But the exposure was fine on a night shoot, but the white balance, I put on auto white balance, which was a decision I made at the time, but I regretted that decision because, of course, there's light streaming by. And even though I lit the car scene with a quasar light, which I'm using here to light me, a quasar light in the front with an orange glow lighting the talent, right? Which was a constant light. But the lights going by when driving were changing all the time. And so the auto white balance was changing all the time. So grading it was an absolute bitch. And also, I had put on the quasar light, it was too orange. I was trying to match the orange of the dashboard to emulate like the dashboard lighting them. And that was a big mistake. I wish I lit it a more neutral color than the kind of strong orange I used. But on the screen, on the GH5, when I was shooting, it looked fine. Luckily enough, I shot in vlog, so I could salvage some of the poorer quality images due to the white balance in post. But I could salvage most of the image. But when you see the short, you'll see there's quite a bit of noise in it. So, but I'm glad I could salvage it. But if I had stuck to a certain Kelvin, then that shoot would have went, those images from that day would have been just much, much better. But here, you live and you learn. I won't make that mistake again. I was really happy with the performances on the street that night, and I was really happy with the performance in the car. Although the actors, and what I find with actors, and it's a good intuition an actor has to improv, to get into the scene, to get a flow in the scene, to really feel out the scene. But the problem with improv is it's a fucking bitch to cut together. And it's a bitch because usually when you're improvising, the actors are overlapping over each other. And so what that means in post is you're limiting your options because they're going over one another. The dialogue is going over. So cutting around that is a fucking bitch. But here, what can you do? There's another lesson learned. I should have learned this lesson, ages ago, because I've done loads of sketches and a lot of the time we're improv and it's like, okay, improv, yeah, but don't overlap one another, So the next scene we had was outside the house, where he parks outside her house after he finds out where she lives after she ODs. He parks outside her house. So there's these night scenes where he drops her body into the living room of her house, checks the house, see if there's anyone there. All of that scene, which was at the end of the evening, this was like 12 o'clock now, and we started the shoot that day at 3. So imagine we were absolutely wrecked. But there really wasn't much problems with that at all because there wasn't any dialogue and they were all kind of moving shots. Now, one of the decisions I made was to do all of that day handheld for speed. And I kind of wish I didn't, because some of the wides, it looks a bit seasicky, but I kind of knew that and anticipated that before I was actually going to shoot it. So here, I would think I would have been a pain in the ass if I was setting up the tripod each time I wanted to do a wide. But overall, I was really happy with that first day. Totally overshot. I think it was like 100 gigs of footage from that first day, which is equivalent to about 6 minutes in the short, With the proxies, that's another 100 gigabytes because my computer, it's fast, but not fast enough to do 4K 10-bit footage, especially when it's graded. So it's about 200 gigs of footage. And I think overall I shot about 2 hours of footage, which is, down to 5. I know that doesn't seem too much, but when you're one man crew, it's quite a lot. So overshot quite a lot. But why did I overshoot? I overshot because I didn't get the performances I wanted sort of out the gate, and it took us a while for the actors to get there. Now, I was really happy with their performance. I think they did a really good job, but I feel that as an actor, and I know, and from directing it, that if the actors had done a bit more prep, we would have got there sooner. That's what I felt, because the prep would inform the performance more, and me as a director wouldn't have to give the concepts to the actors. Now, this is a big lesson I've learned as a director, and the actors learned because they've been looking at the edit with me, that the prep is important. Because if you have the prep there as an actor, right, and as a director, if you have the prep as an actor, you will have more options in the way you react, and you'll react naturally because you can empathize with their history. So for any directors out there, I think that's a top tip that I learned from this one. I kind of knew already, but now it's solidified that. So that was day one. So let's move on to day two. Before we move on to day two, let's go over the gear I used, because I've totally forgotten that. But here, we'll get to it. I have a list here that I'm running off, and I'm trying to tick it off as we go by. NTG2 rifle mic Rode, plugged into the Zoom H5, which I mounted onto my GH5, and I actually didn't have a rig, but I built a makeshift rig, and I'll put the image of the rig I built somewhere up here, so you can check it out. I was really happy with this rig because I built it all myself with all the parts that I had, and it worked really well for the shoot. I had no issues with this rig I built. I never missed recording sound, and I didn't make any out of focus mistakes on set with the GH5 because the peaking was absolutely awesome. The lenses I used, the Sigma 18-35, which I'm filming on now, and the 50mm Nifty 50 1.8, which I used a lot for the close-ups, you know. And with the GH5, obviously, I shot it on Vlog. Some of the lights that I used were just a basic newer bi-color light. It's not that good, but it does the job, and it was light, and I could bring it on set. And the quasar light that I have here, which is bloody brilliant. I recommend any filmmaker to get that, because you can get basically any color you want out of it, and it's actually really bright. It's nice, cool, soft light, and it's a nice, warm, soft light to it as well. So that was some of the gear I used. Of course, we had a shit ton of batteries with us the whole time, and mostly we went through the AA batteries that went in the Zooms, especially for the zoom on the clip mic, and then the zoom for the rifle mic were just eating batteries. The GH5 batteries actually last quite long. So that's the gear I used. So let's move on to day two. So day two was full of massive errors, and I think that was mostly due to a lack of general prep from both me and the actors. I did prep quite a bit for it, but not as much as that night shoot, because there was so much more to get done on that night shoot. So I was hyper vigilant on the things that I might make mistakes on. So on that day two shoot, the amount of mistakes accrued, and I think it overall had an effect on the performance of the actors. Slightly on my direction, but not too much. But everyone was getting tired at a certain point because we had accrued so many mistakes, and then we were just trying to get through the shoot. So there was all these elements. So the location I'd already scouted before, I'd already shot here, so I knew quite a bit about it. And so one of the biggest problems on this day was we were shooting on this day because it was going to be overcast. And of course, if you're a filmmaker, you'll know that shooting on an overcast day is ideal. So sun isn't changing too much. And of course, we're one-man crew, so it's not like I can diffuse it with silks or anything, you know. I was going to be relying on it being overcast. Of course, the day comes around, and of course it's Ireland. It was bright and sunny all day. I managed to get around that because I was shooting into the shadows of the actors. So even though the sun was harsh on them, and which actually kind of suited the vibe of the scene, the harsh reality of the second day shooting scene, it really stretching the dynamic range of the GH5, even though I was shooting into the shadows. And if you don't know, shooting into the shadows is the cinematic look. So one of the other problems I had on that second day of shooting was that I didn't have good enough AA batteries with me. So this was underprepared, and I knew it. I was like, I should have got proper brand name batteries, but I was using brand name rechargeable batteries, but they just don't have enough juice. And so we ran through 8 of those rechargeable batteries in no time. So what I had to leave location and to buy more batteries in the shop and to come back and keep shooting. Pain in the bloody ass, because that delayed the shoot about an hour when I had to go get the batteries, and took the energy out of the actor's performance as well. So, which leads me on to the next thing, which is the actors' performances. Happy with overall, but at the start, I feel that it was undercooked in terms of prep. And what I mean by that, they didn't consider enough of their characters' histories, which would have informed the dialogue more. And also, I feel like both actors had set ideas of what they thought the scene would be. So this is a big actor's problem, I always find. They have set ideas of what the scene will be, and then when you arrive on the day that the scene is different than you expected, or the context is different than what's actually happening right now. It took a while for the performances to get to a natural level, and especially the big note I was saying to both actors was to slow down and really listen and look at the other actors so they could understand the actual situation they were involved in. Now, it was a difficult scene. It was a difficult scene to do, and it is a stretch to imagine how one would deal with that situation. So that's granted. So probably as a director, if I talk to the actors probably before the shoot about that scene in particular and some of the emotions that they might be going through as they sort of go through the scene and some of the concepts that are at play through the scene, that I might not have had to do as many takes as I had to do to get the performance I needed. So, you know, as I said about the day one, I was going through the takes to the point where I went, right, I got it, I can move on. So I did it on that day, and both actors on their medium shots, I think the female actress was 17 takes and the male actress was 15 takes. So you can imagine it was quite a long day, and by the end of it, I could tell the actors didn't have the energy to give the performances that I was kind of intuitively feeling. But I reckon we got the best of what we could with all the mistakes made. I was really concerned about that day that because of the sun changing, that I wouldn't be able to grade them to make the cuts match up. And also, I did a walking scene where I shot it on the ATD because of the autofocus. So I could use the Zion crane with the autofocus and get a nice blurry background. And so I was concerned that I wouldn't be able to match the ADD's footage with the GH5's footage, especially because I was shooting Vlog on the GH5, and on the ADD I was shooting on the natural profile, which I was considering of getting magic bullets for the ADD before this set and, you know, shooting in a flatter profile. But I didn't want to do that because I wasn't familiar enough with magic bullets, and with the time I said I'd rather shoot on the natural profile and get that right. Luckily enough, I could match the footage just about in post. Some of the shots look slightly different, but they all got the same color grade, but you can tell the difference in camera, and you can probably tell the different times in day. But I was really concerned I'd have to reshoot that entire day, and I really didn't want to reshoot that entire day. So happy days, the second day worked out well. So that was the second day. And the third day of pickups, which was just the third day, not really pickups, was I had to get the living room scene, which was really interesting thing to shoot because I had to really prep for this shoot because I have housemates and they're here during the night. So we had to shoot this during the day, but it had to be a nighttime scene inside. So they were away, so I blacked out the windows with black bags, the hallway in my house and the front room, and I lit it as such in the scene where he comes in and drops the girl off and frames it like she OD'd herself, frames it like a suicide, that it looked like moonlight coming in the window. And I achieved that look, making the Kelvin look really cool and actually tinting on the camera a blue tint to give it more of a blue look, because I didn't really have blue gels. I was really happy with that footage and how it looked like evening, even though I shot it during the day. And that scene went really smoothly, no mistakes at all. So I was really happy with that. But I was glad I prepared beforehand because I tried many different things and I learned a lot about how one could shoot inside at night. So that was that day of pickups. And so the other 2 days of pickups, day 4 and day 5, were kind of interspersed with editing, sort of where we felt we needed extra bits. And so we just kind of went along with that. And as we go, it's like, oh, this would be good to get a piece here. And so me and my partner kind of shot it there and then, because we didn't really need the female actress, because it was mostly centered around this protagonist. And obviously she's dead after the first half of the short. So the other parts we kind of knew we could get. Yeah, so we shot those on the day 4. And on the day 5, when we got a kind of a roughish draft of the edit, we realized we were missing another scene before the night scene, and then 2 years later. So we needed a scene in the middle, a scene that kind of tied it all together. So we kind of had an idea of what he's gone through after the event. And so we came up with this idea that he's on break at work and his beard is shaved now to indicate that he's sort of a different person after this event. You know, it's changed him and the guilt is eating him up, and there's life happening all around him. So I came up with this on the fly, which I was really happy. And he is completely zoned out, not present. And the camera cuts in closer and closer and closer to him. And then he makes a decision to go to the Garda station. And then he's outside the Garda station on a wide. And just before he goes in, he decides not to do it and turns around. And then we cut to 2 years later. And what I was really happy is this day of pickups. It really makes the entire narrative come together. So I paid for all the mistakes I made in the edit, and I paid for the mistakes the actors made in the edit, especially the overtakes, especially the improv. It just adds hours. That is the biggest adder. It's not even a word. Adding of hours in the edit is actors talking over each other's dialogue. So, you know, note to any editors out there or directors and even actors, you know, when you're improving, don't talk over the other person's line. Or if you do one take and then one take where you've got space. But I understand the actor's intuition. I understand their intuition to need to get to the flow. The first few drafts of the edit, I was constantly, you know, asking myself when going through the rough drafts, is it in here? Oh, fuck, I don't think it might be in here. Ooh, I'm worried that it's not in here. Oh, no, it's in here. And then you're sort of going on this hopeful thought that, no, it's actually in here. I just need to work it out. And slowly you're grafting this thing that's actually, okay, something's happening here. There's something going on here. The concepts are coming alive. And your intuition on the day, you can then see it in the edit of the choices I made as a director and see that intuition, those thoughts I had about the direct, it's now there in the edit, which is really great feeling. It reassures me that I have a great intuition on the day. One thing that I commend myself for, I made a lot of filmmaking mistakes as a DOP-esque, but my intuition was strong throughout, which I was, you know, I was really happy with, so that I know I can trust that. You know, the other things like the DOP side of things, I can concentrate more on and getting the technical stuff right. And I don't think that's a worrying thing for me, because I'm, you know, over the next year, that's really going to get more refined. Pay the big price with not getting the Atmos. But that was a decision. And I know you're probably listening to this and thinking, crazy, he didn't get any Atmos all set. But I'm used to doing a lot of sketches. You know, I've done, you know, over 50 sketches now. I hadn't done Atmos a lot. And what I realized is I can actually get Atmos from parts that are silent in takes. That served enough. I was lucky enough that I had enough silences that I could make up for the Atmos. But I did pay the price for that, because if I had filmed Atmos, then I could have put it in here and there, and it'd have been less hours of editing basically for me. But I decided not to go with the Atmos. And why I decided not to go with it, because I didn't want to take the momentum out of the actors' performances, because in general we didn't have the time, because I was a one-man crew, and so I was, you know, taxed myself. And so I wanted to keep the momentum of the set, and it wasn't like, you know, we could take these long breaks. Oh, let's get the Atmos now. It's like, no, bang, 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 bang. And that's why I didn't get the Atmos. If you're thinking about making a short film, just wait until you get to that part. You think, oh, fuck, it's not emotionally there. The story really isn't there. But it's amazing how much the sound effects and the music really add to the narrative. It ties it all together. It gives an extra context, an external context, which, you know, sort of drives the narrative on. So I'm there now, and now I'm making these smaller changes. It's like, you know, if I lengthen a close-up here or lengthen a medium here, it changes kind of the whole journey you go on with the protagonist, which is really an interesting thing, because, you know, I've done a lot of sketches and I hadn't done something as long as sort of 10 minutes in a while. When you're doing this kind of longer piece, every change changes your opinion of the protagonist, changes how you see the story, the emotional journey and everything. It's amazing how such a simple change like that has such a massive effect. And obviously one of the big mistakes, and I mentioned it earlier, was the white balance. Generally speaking, if I was to do this again, I wouldn't put auto white balance on, and I would set the white balance for every take in well, not every take, but every scene. That's an easy thing to say, but that's just another thing to think about. And I guess if I was a more experienced filmmaker, I could do that more on the fly. But I was lighting these scenes as well, you know. I was lighting every scene that was going by, so that was taxing me, and I was like, okay, this is good enough to shoot. Let's get going. That was kind of my thinking. But not setting the white balance, especially in that car scene, because the lights were always changing around me, and so the white balance was always changing, and grading it in post was a nightmare. I'd say alone 8 hours just grading that car scene, and it's only about 2 minutes, you know, just to get it right. And luckily enough, I got Premiere 2019, which I'm working with now, and trying to, you know, match those images. Now, I'm not a colorist, but I think I would say I have a pretty good eye for color. But that is, so the sound and not setting the white balance, the Atmos and not setting the white balance were the two huge mistakes for me as a director on this set. Some of the good things that I think, the decisions I made, all the intuitive decisions and all the concepts that I gave the actors, I felt were context appropriate, and they are the pieces I used in my final rough cuts. So I'm really happy that I can trust my intuition like that, and that the years of me doing acting and even the small time I'm doing filmmaking, that intuition as an actor pays off as a director. I'm getting to the bones of what it means to make a dramatic scene, both directing and acting, so and what it needs from a script. So I've learned so much from those disciplines through this short. And I think a lot of sort of directors struggle with that specifically, and the technical stuff not so much. Now, there's the other thing. Technically, as a filmmaker, I'm just not there. You know, it's just not there. I mean, I'm pretty okay for someone who's been doing it less than 2 years. I'm not making crazy amount of mistakes, but I'm making enough mistakes. I'm making enough mistakes to say that if I made less mistakes and I framed better and I exposed better and I lit better and I shot better, you know, that the overall quality of what I'm making, even narratively speaking, even performance-wise, would have been better, because I could tell the story better through the medium, through the skilled medium. It is taking up too much of my mental capacity, and it is not in my bones yet, you know. Framing is pretty good for me, but some of the other technical aspects are not. And sound is something I need to learn more about and get better at getting it cleaner and making better decisions there. So that's one thing I need to make the decisions on. Well, hopefully I'll have this video up soon enough. It'll be on a different channel than the one here, but I'll link it in this description of this video. I don't mind if you think it's shit. That doesn't really bother me too much. I've made so much stuff now that is crap. I just don't care anymore, which is also a good thing. And I noticed that on set, that I was like, this could fail, but I don't actually give a shit, because I know I'm going to learn, which is a good place to be in. I think that kind of wraps up all the lessons learned and all the things that I did well and didn't do well in this shoot. I hope you learned something from this, because I certainly learned a lot from even talking about it to camera, you know, just going over some of the places where I could, you know, sort of improve upon. So I learned a lot, and I hope you did too. And if you like this video, drop me a comment and I'll get back to you as soon as I can.